Welcome to another reading of Church History and Plain Language by Bruce Shelley. We're starting with chapter 28. It'll be called The Curse Upon the Crown, the Church of England. Okay, let's get straight to it. On a Saturday afternoon in June 1533, a dark-eyed English lady, surrounded by the nation's nobility, rode through London's crowded streets and triumphal arches. Anne Boleyn, mounted on a chair draped in silver and gold, was on her way to Westminster Abbey, where the next morning she would be solemnly anointed and crowned Queen of England. Prompting that entourage was a series of fast-paced events that carried England into the Reformation of Christianity in its distinctive way and created the historic background for a host of Anglo-American denominations, including Episcopalians, Congregationalists, and Baptists. If the Lutheran Reformation began in a monastic cell, the Anabaptist Reformation in a prayer meeting, and the Calvinistic Reformation at a scholar's desk, then the English Reformation began in the affairs of state, specifically with the problem of succession to the royal throne. In a sense, England had two reformations, a constitutional one under King Henry VIII from 1509 to 1547, and a theological one under the Puritans almost a century later. Under Henry, nothing changed doctrinally. England simply rejected the authority of Rome. And in its move, however, England forecast the future of Christianity into modern nations. She made Christian beliefs almost altogether a private affair and considered the practice of religion an instrument of the state. Later generations called it civil religion. However, how could such a thing happen? Why did England, even without any great theological issue, overthrow the long-standing authority of the Church of Rome? So, I actually want to quickly step in because I forgot to do this at the beginning. And so I'm going to step in real quick and ask a few questions out of this, it's a workbook. But, yeah, I'll just mention some of these. It'll be like some spoiler alerts because the questions themselves tell you a little bit of what's going to happen. So if you didn't already know the church history around this, then it'll be a spoiler. But these are just some things to think about while I'm reading. So, number one, how did King Henry VIII's marital problems lead to England renouncing papal authority and establishing the Church of England? Anglicans. Number two, what were the two serious changes that marked the new way of the Church of England under Henry VIII? Though he was burned at the stake before seeing his work finished, what did William Tyndale contribute to the English Reformation? And then we have summarized the religious attitudes and influence of the three monarchs to follow Henry VIII. That is Edward VI, Mary, and Elizabeth. And then fifth, last one. Describe the terms of the Via Media, Elizabeth's middle way between Protestantism and Catholicism. Okay. Now, back to the text. We're at another section, England's break with Rome. The idea arose out of the marital problems of King Henry. Exactly the question here. The idea arose out of the marital problems of King Henry, whom Charles Dickens once described as a most intolerable ruffian and a blot of blood and grease on the history of England. Wow. Other influences, to be sure, contributed to the break with Rome, but succession to the throne was the primary constitutional factor in the transformation of the church in England into the Church of England. For centuries, the church in England had been moving toward independence from Rome. By Luther's time, most patriotic English had a sense of the distinctive character of the faith in their homeland. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey from 1474 to 1530 is probably the best symbol of the independence of England. Is probably the best symbol of the independence England had achieved even prior to Henry's break with Rome. Wolsey was the Archbishop of York, a cardinal in the Church of Rome, and the Chancellor of the English realm. So in his own person, he combined the Church in England, the Church of Rome, and the Kingdom of England. Yet, in all of these offices, he was the king's henchman, subject to honor or disgrace at the royal whim. Understandably, the schism in the church came over a royal problem, not over theological conflicts. Putting it simply, Henry VIII, King of England, revolted against the Pope because he passionately desired the dark-eyed Anne Boleyn, a lady-in-waiting of the court. But that is only the headline. The backstory involves a royal succession to the English throne and the need for an heir to the throne, not personal lust of the king. Henry knew how to satisfy his lust. He shared the customary royal pastime with mistresses and had at least one illegitimate son. His problem was he had no son born of his queen, Catherine of Aragon. Catherine, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, had delivered 5 children, but the only survivor beyond infancy was the Princess Mary. Unfortunately, England was in no mood to accept a girl as heir to the throne because the nation's only previous queen had occasioned bloody wars of succession. Thus, as Catherine grew older, Henry grew more troubled. In 1525, the queen was 40, and Henry pondered more and more the ways of the Almighty. Am I under some curse of God? That's a quotation. The question arose because prior to their marriage, Catherine had been Henry's deceased brother Arthur's wife, at least for several months, and Henry believed that the curse of God fell on any marriage to a brother's wife. According to the book of Leviticus, if a man marries his brother's wife, it is an act of impurity. They will be childless. That's Leviticus 20:21. Naturally, the Church of Rome had also recognized the curse, and at the time of Henry's wedding, Pope Julius II had found grounds for granting special permission for this wedding. But with the passing of the barren years, Henry wondered if Julius had not overstepped his sacred rights. Was Catherine's inability to bear a son evidence of God's curse upon the union? If so, why couldn't the Pope divide asunder what he had joined? In 1527, Henry asked the Holy Father Clement VII to revoke the special dispensation and declare the marriage of 18 years invalid from the outset. The Pope might have been open to the idea had not Catherine been the aunt of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain. At that moment, the Pope could ill afford to offend the Emperor, so he stalled. Henry's personal reasons for desiring the annulment were matched by the Pope's political reasons for refusing the request. Henry decided to take matters into his own hands. He eagerly adopted the suggestion of one of his advisors, Thomas Cranmer, that he present his case to the European universities for their scholarly opinion. The response, as one might expect, was mixed, but Henry had his cover for imposing his will on the nation. In January 1533, the king secretly married Anne. In May, an English church court declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void, and in September, the new queen gave birth to a child. Contrary to the forecasts of astrologers, it was a girl, Elizabeth. When the Pope countered Henry's move by excommunicating him, Henry realized that papal authority in England had to be overthrown. The king knew the anti-papal sympathies in England were running high. At Cambridge, for example, certain instructors were so taken with Luther that the favorite gathering place, the Inn of the White Horse, was called Little Germany. So the king calculated that he would face little popular opposition so long as he renounced papal authority in England and avoided troublesome doctrinal questions. Henry moved briskly on a series of fronts. He discovered an old 14th century law prohibiting dealings with foreign powers and used it to insist that the English clergy stop their dealings with the Pope. A year later, in 1534, the Act of Supremacy declared, "The King's Majesty justly and rightly is and ought to be and shall be reputed the only supreme head in earth of the Church of England called Anglicana Ecclesia." The Anglican Church. It was done. The break with Rome was complete. England now had a national church with the king as its head. The head, however, was not a priest. He could appoint bishops, but he could not consecrate them. He could defend the faith, but he could not formulate it. The king looked to the Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest office in the Church of England, to serve the purposes of the priesthood, and secured the services of Thomas Cranmer in that post. Next section, Henry's dual policy. Okay, Henry's dual policy. The sole religious issue then in England's initial Reformation was papal supremacy. Henry intended to break with the old faith. He considered himself, in fact, a guardian of Catholic dogma. In 1521, in answer to Luther's attack on the seven sacraments, the king had written a defense of the seven sacraments. In it, he had castigated Luther as a poisonous serpent and a wolf of hell. In gratitude, the Pope had bestowed on Henry the title Defender of the Faith, a title still carried by English monarchs. After the break with Rome, England's orthodoxy remained intact. Henry continued to insist on Catholic doctrine within the realm. Apparently, his goal was an English Catholic church instead of a Roman Catholic one. The Statute of 6 Articles in 1539 upheld such Catholic articles as clerical celibacy, the private mass, and confessions to a priest. Only two serious changes. This is one of the questions, actually, that was in there. Only two serious changes marked the new way within the Church of England. The first was the suppression of the monasteries, and the second was the publication of the English Bible for use in the churches. That's actually a very good change for them to have that. Monks in England were neither popular nor devout. One author called them foul, unhappy lepers who despoiled poor wives of the 10th egg. Interesting. Probably because they're begging all the time. Like, at least that's what some of them were. Their lack of dedication to their calling was evident. In 1536, when Henry suppressed the smaller monasteries, the king gave the monks the opportunity either of transferring to other houses or of entering secular life. Fully one half chose society over another cloister. Henry used the monastic properties, almost 1/10 of the national wealth, to replenish the royal coffers and to gain support from favored barons and gentry who were given to or permitted to purchase the property. Monks received a reasonable pension, but Henry succeeded by this one stroke in reducing the opposition of his policy and gaining new friends. The second change in the Church of England occurred when Henry ordered that an English Bible be installed in all the churches. In principle, the Church of Rome did not object to versions of the native tongue, provided they were orthodox and authorized. Translations from the Hebrew and Greek, however, were bound to offend Rome because she had for centuries based crucial doctrines on questionable translations found in the Latin version. The most noteworthy example is the Latin rendering "do penance," where the Greek means simply repent. Rome, therefore, could hardly welcome news of another English Bible, especially in the wake of Wycliffe's heresy. Nevertheless, shortly after the publication of Erasmus's Greek New Testament in 1516, with its preface urging the translation of Scripture into the common tongues of Europe, new versions appeared in German, French, and English. These fed rising national sentiments and Protestant convictions. Next section, William Tyndale's Bible. The pioneer in the translation of the English Bible was William Tyndale. A zeal to place the English scriptures into the hands of the common folk burned in Tyndale's soul. After receiving his ordination, he once expressed his frank amazement at the ignorance of the clergy. When a fellow priest resented this observation, Tyndale hotly replied, "If God spares my life before many years pass, I will make it possible for a boy behind the plow to know more scriptures than you do." Tyndale soon learned, however, that such an undertaking was not welcome in England. After study at Oxford and Cambridge, he was forced to flee to the continent. To live, labor, and print the New Testament. Early in 1526, he began smuggling the first copies of his work into his homeland. In the following years, Tyndale translated portions of the Old Testament and brought out an improved edition of the New. Church officials continued to hound him, however, and in 1536 he fell into their hands. After 17 months in prison, Tyndale went to his death at the stake. His dying prayer was, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." Events in England were already moving swiftly toward an answer to Tyndale's prayer. During his months of imprisonment, another Cambridge graduate and reformer, Miles Coverdale, had published the first edition of his complete translation of the Bible. The edition was basically Tyndale's work, supplemented by Latin and German versions. Here's this picture says, "The beginning of the Gospel of Matthew from Tyndale's 1526 edition of the New Testament." There you go. And all right, back to the text. Then, a year after Tyndale's death, the Matthew Bible appeared. It was the work of another English reformer named John Rogers, who thought it was wise to send forth his translation without his name attached. The Matthew Bible was virtually a well-edited compilation of Tyndale's and Coverdale's work. At Thomas Cranmer's request, however, Henry VIII authorized that the Bible, revised by Coverdale and called the Great Bible, be brought and read throughout the realm. Tyndale's dying prayer was answered, at least in part. The sudden access to the scriptures created widespread excitement, so much so that Henry issued new regulations limiting the reading of the Bible to wealthy merchants and aristocrats. Greater freedom, however, was just a matter of time. Isn't it terrible that at first he's like, just the merchants and aristocrats? Okay, profiles of faith. Alrighty, Martin Bucer, 1491, which is 1 year before Columbus sailed the ocean blue, to 1551. A Dominican friar saw Martin Luther defend his position at the Heidelberg Disputation in 1518, which prompted Bucer to become Protestant. Though excommunicated by the Catholics, Bucer began to teach the Bible to lay Christians, first in Latin but later in German, as he championed the use of vernacular language in Bible study and worship. Known for his irenic spirit, he functioned as a peace broker between warring factions of Protestants. He worked tirelessly to find common ground between the different reform movements, and Strasbourg, under his leadership, became a haven for Protestants of all stripes, Lutheran, Reformed, and Zwinglian. Bucer shaped the Reformation in Switzerland by convincing John Calvin, who resided in Strasbourg from 1538 to 1541, to adopt Presbyterian church government. Near the end of his life, Bucer relocated to Cambridge, where he collaborated with Thomas Cranmer on the Book of Common Prayer. Next section is the swing to Protestantism. I'm going to quickly take a hot chocolate break. I recommend hot chocolate to anybody out there who doesn't yet realize how amazing it is. Okay, the swing to Protestantism. After the king's death in 1547, his only son, frail 10-year-old Edward VI, followed his father to the throne. Edward's mother was Jane Seymour, whom Henry had married after he had executed Anne Boleyn on charges of adultery. The power of government under young Edward rested with a group of royal advisors who were in sympathy with the Protestant Reformation. So official English policy shifted abruptly in a Protestant direction. During Edward's brief years, England saw the 6 Articles repealed, priests allowed to marry, and the old Latin service of worship replaced by Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer in English. In 1553, Cranmer also produced the 42 Articles, which defined the faith of the Church of England along Protestant lines. This swing in a Protestant direction came to a sudden halt when Edward died in 1553 and Mary, the daughter of Catherine, ascended the throne. Just in case anybody remembered, Edward VI, what he did, his influence, his attitude and influence, and then now we're gonna get to Mary and then Elizabeth. Okay, this swing in a Protestant direction came to a sudden halt when Edward died in 1553 and Mary, the daughter of Catherine, ascended the throne. Devoutly Catholic, Mary tried to lead England back to the ways of Rome. In 4 short years, she outdid her father in intolerance. She sent nearly 300 Protestants, including Archbishop Cranmer, to the burning stake. Later, John Foxe collected the vivid reports of these martyrdoms in his Book of Martyrs, which was written in 1571, and incited the English people to a long-standing horror of Catholicism. He succeeded in giving Mary the name by which history still remembers her, Bloody Mary. Okay. Bloody Mary, where am I at? Okay, though Mary was probably the only really pious English monarch of the 16th century, she committed an unforgivable blunder in making martyrs. By the 1550s, England had enjoyed almost a generation without interference from Rome, so the country interpreted her devotion and her marriage to Philip of Spain as betrayal of her people. She died a broken and disappointed queen. With the accession to the throne of Anne Boleyn's red-headed and fiery-tempered daughter Elizabeth I, who was from 1558 to 1603, the Anglican Church assumed its distinctive character, neither Roman nor Reformed, realizing the political necessity for religious peace. Elizabeth worked hard to achieve a compromise settlement. Although the Church of England remained a state church under the control of the monarch, Elizabeth astutely changed her title from supreme head to the more modest supreme governor. In accepting the Bible as the final authority and in recognizing only baptism and the Holy Eucharist as Christ-instituted sacraments, Elizabeth's 39 articles in 1563 were essentially Protestant, but many articles were worded in a way that would satisfy both Catholics and Protestants. The liturgy of the Church retained many Catholic elements, and bishops in apostolic succession governed the Church. Elizabeth, like the monarchs after her, received and believed advice that a bishop-led church would be easier to control. In time, English church officials spoke of this compromise as the best of both worlds, the Via Media, the middle way between Protestantism and Catholicism. That's the last thing that was asked in this book. Some of the exiles who were forced out of England during Mary's reign were not so sure. When they returned from the continent to Elizabeth's establishment, they began to cry out against, quote unquote, the ease in Zion. They had read their Bibles and had developed their own ideas about the true Reformation in England. We know these reformers as Puritans, preachers of personal and national righteousness. The future was dawning. And that is the end of this chapter. And next time we'll be reading about the Catholic Reformation.